David Ripley, how are you, sir?
I'm great. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, I appreciate you schlepping all the way out here. I know it's a bit of a haul. Good news is during the legislative session, I'll have a studio courtesy of the state PTA downtown, and we'll be able to talk to lawmakers and citizens, lobbyists, and things of that nature. So,
Well, that's cool.
yeah. So if you're down there during the legislative session, come on through for a 2.0 interview. Right before we started, I was mentioning work I'm doing on tech safety for children and in the state of Idaho specifically, but it applies obviously to everybody nationally. And you said that it has never been more risky or dangerous to be a child. And that really struck me because it's like, gosh, man, we have made a very scary world for children. You are engaged deeply with Idaho Chooses Life. Very pro-life. You were engaged in the creation of the trigger bill that went into effect. Trigger bill was made in 2020. Is that correct?
That's
Great. So it was penned in 2020, went into effect in 2022 when Roe v. Wade was repealed. And then it was modified in the 2023 legislative session to, modify a couple things. I want to hear, I've heard part of your story and your journey of getting to this point. But if you wouldn't mind sharing again, I would love to hear how you got here.
Well, I appreciate that. Thinking about this interview, I thought I would encourage you to let me talk a little bit about how I got here and how I got into this work, because I think it will be a context for people to understand better what I might have to say later about the law and why I do this, right? So actually, this is kind of an important season for me. I didn't even quite click into it until a couple of days ago. This is the 40th year. 40 years ago, I came to Idaho on a motorcycle, brought in by the National Education Association Teachers Union to work on a congressional race. Richard Stallings was running for Congress in the 2nd District, and they brought me in for, I think I was here for 6 to 8 weeks or something like that, at the end of the election to work on get out the vote, especially in Ada County. And I had no intention of staying. In fact, when the election, probably a week after the election, I resumed my motorcycle journey. Easy rider going off to California. And
did you have long hair, by the way?
Oh, yep.
Oh, yeah.
That was happening. And, I was a hardcore. In fact, I was literally a card-carrying socialist. I belonged to the Democratic Socialists of America. When I was in college in Minnesota, I was the state youth director for the DSA and did organizing on campuses, published a monthly newsletter for students and all that. So when I came to Idaho, it was I had some personal issues going on, and I just needed a break from politics. But I was sort of shamed by all my friends who couldn't believe I was leaving in the middle of a presidential election and just going off into the woods, to study my navel or whatever. So I accepted the contract to do work here to see if I could help. And Stallings won, right? First Democrat elected out of Idaho. It's a long time. And I took off and resumed my motorcycle adventure. But it kind of sucked because the weather was just crappy, and I finally had enough of riding around on a motorcycle. When I got to Phoenix and it started snowing, I was like, okay, this is nowhere near the movie, man. I picked the wrong time of the year to do this. I should have never dinked around in, Idaho. I could have been, laying out on the beach someplace in Texas or something. I don't know. But anyway, I ended up selling the bike in Phoenix and going back to Minnesota, grabbing some stuff and coming back to Idaho because I guess I needed a new start or whatever. That was 40 years ago, this, election season. Wow. And I ended up establishing a Democrat political consulting firm in Idaho, the first and I think maybe, well, I don't know if there's one now. I've lost track of I'm sure there's a Democratic firm now. There's a lot more money involved. But in those days, there were very few Democrats in the legislature. And I partnered up with John Stocks, and we started Ripley Stocks, Inc. to help elect Democrats to the Idaho legislature. And that was in 85, I think. And we were very successful. And I had a lot of money from the teachers union to deal with conservatives and to deal with Republicans in general. And we made quite a dent, and for those who might remember, back in 1990, abortion became a major issue in the state of Idaho. The Republican majority decided that they were going to test Roe v. Wade and introduced a bill. It was designed to provoke a court case, a court challenge that they hoped would get to the U.S. Supreme Court. Cecil Andrus was governor. There was a pretty strong majority in both chambers, and they passed House Bill 625, which would have made it illegal to have an abortion in the state of Idaho, except in the case of life of the mother, rape, or incest. And I was very involved working with Planned Parenthood and a bunch of progressive groups to try to stop that bill from getting passed. And then I was very involved in lobbying Governor Andrus to veto that bill, which is what actually happened. But my main function was to make the Republican Party pay for having supported such radical pro-life legislation. And we did. By the time we got through the general election of 1990, the Democrats had achieved a parity with the Republicans in the Idaho Senate. In fact, it was a tied Senate. Butch Otter was lieutenant governor going into the 91 session and could never go to the bathroom because he had to decide virtually every bill that was voted on in that session. And it was, in a weird way, the crowning achievement of my political career up to that point, because we had made massive changes to the Idaho legislature using the abortion issue and all the hype that came with it. We had international media camped on the State House grounds. There were daily demonstrations around the Capitol during that legislative session. The pro-life people would hold rallies in the afternoon, and in the evening, the pro-choice crowd would gather and march around the Capitol and so forth. And that went on pretty much every day for weeks. It's hard to describe the fever pitch that the life issue had taken on in that season of Idaho. And we were very successful at beating a lot of pro-life Republicans in that general election. In fact, there was not a Republican in the legislature from Canada to Nampa. Every legislative seat was in Democratic hands in the 1st Congressional District until you got to Canyon County, which is pretty hard for people to believe, but it's a fact, so you can go check it yourself. And abortion was the heart of it, and part of what happened was the pro-life movement, which was largely comprised of Right to Life at that time, was pretty distressed by the veto by Andrus, who had up to that point had claimed to be a pro-life Democrat. In fact, it's hard for people to also believe this, but another truth from history, there were such animals as pro-life Democrats in that era. In in fact, many of the Democrats going in the 80s were good Catholic, pro-life people.
Well, that was a different Democratic Party.
That was a very different.
Very different.
In fact, part of the consequence of my work in that era is that I helped to change the Democratic Party in Idaho. I convinced a number of pro-life Democrats to see the light on the life issue and to become pro-choice. So we had a number of Democrats in the legislature at that time that publicly announced that they had become progressive on the issue and they were now pro-choice. And virtually every one of them ended up voting against House Bill 625 in that 1990 session. And I bear a lot of responsibility for convincing people through argumentation, I guess, and showing them polling data and political strategy that was the best course of action for them. And politicians tend to be fairly flexible about moral issues when it comes to retaining office. So, the consequence of all that is that the Republican Party pretty much announced, and resolved, starting in the 91 session, that they were not going to go anywhere near abortion ever again because it was a political disaster for them. Part of that disaster, though, was the result of the pro-life community abandoning the field. Once that veto happened, there were a lot of people were just discouraged and heartbroken that all their work in lobbying that bill had come to a veto. So they pretty much abandoned the field when it came to the election work. So they were not there to support the people that had carried water for them in the session. People like Rod Beck, for example, was the majority leader in the Senate and the prime sponsor of that bill. And he was one of the scalps that I claimed that fall of 1990. And he got very little practical help from the pro-life movement at a time when he really needed it. So part of the success of that year was, the money I had to work with and my skill at doing the election work. But it also was not exactly a fair fight because all the energy was on the pro-abortion side, and the pro-lifers had pretty much gone home to, be depressed, I guess, right? Okay. So the result of it, though, was a debacle for the pro-life movement, really, and a resolve by the Republicans and the leadership in the Republican Party. So, never again. We're never getting near that issue again because we just barely survived, which is impossible, right? In a state like Idaho, how could the Republican Party be in trouble? But so for 10 years, actually, the Idaho legislature did not consider a single pro-life bill. It would not allow a bill to be introduced, period. And that has some consequence in my story because about 4 years after that great victory, I had gotten remarried, we had gotten pregnant, and then that summer of 1994, the woman I was married to at the time decided to have an abortion. And it rocked my world because even though I had become clearly committed, to the pro-choice point of view, I'd always believed it was a woman's body and so forth and so forth. It was in a context of a very, very immature understanding of what abortion is and how abortion actually works and what it does to people. And the notion that in a marriage situation that I would have nothing to say about that child being destroyed was difficult for me to get my mind around, despite the fact that I had been passing out all the bumper stickers about a woman's right to choose and all that business. I was pretty stupid about the issue, really. And when she declared that she was, looking at an abortion, I had a bunch of Democrat lawyer friends in Boise, drinking buddies of mine, and I started meeting with them to figure out if there was something that I could do about this, right? Could we go to court and stop this somehow? Because it was clear that she was choosing an abortion because she was unhappy with me and the state of the marriage, and perhaps rightly so. But it was clear to me that that baby should not pay the price for me being a jackass. And I started talking with lawyers and trying to figure out what I could do to protect him. I had seen his ultrasound. It was a real baby. There was no question about that. And he was an innocent in this, breakdown of this relationship. And, I remember buddies of mine saying, well, brother, I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do about this. I mean, that's what Roe v. Wade is. And I was like, well, yeah, but I'm her husband. I'm the father. I want this baby. This baby did nothing to anybody. And this isn't right. Well, that may be, but as far as the law is concerned, you don't exist until that baby is born. And that was kind of I feel kind of stupid, talking about that, because I was so involved in selling abortion, defending abortion and all that, but I understood so little of really what it was and how it worked. And the fact is, I was reduced to pleading for his life, and with a jury of one, and she made the decision to go through with the abortion. And when I found that out, it was it was crushing, because I felt a lot of guilt for the situation with him and her, my failure to be able to defend him as his father. And that led to a lot of guilt around what I had been doing with my life. And, it was pretty overwhelming, really. So I attempted suicide about a week after that, because the more I contemplated all of that, it was clear to me that I had a lot of blood on my hands, to cut to the chase. And I was working for the Idaho Education Association. I'd closed my consulting firm, and I was on full-time staff with them as their first political director. And I was going up north to work on political campaigns, and took a side trip down to St. Joe and parked the rig in the woods and attempted suicide that night. And I won't bore you and your listeners with the whole saga, but it was a very long night, and the sun came up, and I realized the drugs weren't going to work, and I was still here. So that was, I'm certainly glad, but at the moment it was very distressing, because this was my exit plan. And I crawled into Coeur d'Alene, got a room at a motel there, and tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I spent a weekend there, a few days, trying to recover from the drugs. And the only thing I had in the room was a Gideon Bible. And it was me and the Bible and the Lord in that room. And I realized that if I was going to live, I had to find a different way to live. And if I was going to do that, I needed help. And so that began my journey, in the pro-life movement. Because one of the things that was clear to me is that I had a lot of atonement to work out. And I quit my job with the IEA, and but then in January of '95, I started Idaho Chooses Life. And it's a very modest beginning, because, of course, everybody that is involved in the pro-life movement saw me as, the devil incarnate. And so it was a pretty difficult period of time, because I was in no man's land, right? I had become a pariah with my Democrat friends, because I had abandoned the core principle of a woman's right to choose. And I had spent a decade battling with people on the conservative and pro-life side of the issue. So, I knew nobody, and there was very few people that were willing to even talk to me. But there were a few who recognized that God was at work in my life. And they came alongside me and extended a hand of friendship and kind of nursed me through a very difficult, lonely period of time in my life, and showed me the compassion of Christ in real life, real time. One of the moments that I'll never forget is former legislator Bob Forey. He represented a district in Canyon County, very strong Christian conservative, and I had been hired by the IAA to whack him in a Republican primary, and I think that was in 1986. And I ran a brutal campaign against him, and we beat him. We beat a bunch of conservatives in that election season. And I would say that it's fair that I engaged in some fairly underhanded tactics to get rid of him, right? Well, years later, I ran into Bob Forey at the Ada County Courthouse. And I hadn't really ever talked to the man, but he was friends with Gary Glenn, and who was one of the men that had come alongside me in that period in 1994 or 95. And I was down having lunch with Gary, and we ran into Bob at the courthouse, and he calls out to Bob and says, "Bob, you got to come over here and meet David Ripley." And I was like, I could have just died, okay? I mean, I was just so ashamed. And Bob comes leaping across the rotunda in the courthouse, and he grabs me, shakes my hand, and gives me a hug. And it was one of the most wonderful moments, really, from that period, because it was not just Christianity blah blah, it was Christianity real. It was real caring for me. He had read about my story in the paper and so forth, and he had heard all kinds of stories, and he just wanted to encourage me. In fact, he became one of the founding board members of Idaho Chooses Life. And so when I started Idaho Chooses Life, having learned the weaknesses of the pro-life movement, I decided that what the pro-life movement needed was a political action committee to help support pro-life candidates for the legislature. It wasn't enough to go up to the State House and make demands on people. We had to be there to support them. When people came back at them, we needed to raise money. We needed to get volunteers out there. We needed to help support them in a practical way, because if we were ever going to recover a pro-life movement or value system in the state, we had to make it politically palatable. So that's been the core mission for Idaho Chooses Life ever since. I got involved in lobbying later on because I was unhappy with how things were being done at the in the State House in terms of the legislation that was being presented and how it was being argued and so forth. And so here I am now 30 years later, still at work, but now in a different sort of way. Now we're on defense. For 26 years or thereabouts, I was on offense, trying to move the ball and trying to increase the level of protections for babies in the womb and increasing the protections for families and parental authority and so forth. We spent 10 years trying to get a parental consent law passed in Idaho to require a parent's permission before a girl could undergo an abortion. And so we were always on offense. In 2022, when the Defense of Life Act took effect, when lightning hit and the Supreme Court overturned Roe, we now find ourselves in a very strange dynamic of being on defense. So now I'm in the position of trying to explain what the Defense of Life Act is, how it works, why it is a great blessing to the people of Idaho, and answering accusations and charges from all quarters, primarily the media, as to why we need this law and why it's a great thing for the people of Idaho. So there's a thumbnail sketch of my life, I guess.
The Defense of Life comes into play in 2020. So even when Roe versus Wade is in effect, alive and well, and how did you come to getting the Defense of Life Act passed, even though you knew it would never come actually into effect until Roe v. Wade? So, it's been described to me that act passing was more of just a commentary on the position of Idaho legislators and lawmakers at the time, but that it wasn't really anticipated that particular law would not only come into effect, but, be long for this world, and that, it probably wouldn't exist in its current iteration if it did come into effect. That's what's been described to me. I was not there. I do not know. That's why I'm asking you. So what was it that drove you or allowed you to get that act passed in 2020, even though everybody knew Roe versus Wade was still in effect?
Well, most of what you just said is true.
I nailed it. Look at that. Come on now.
But there are some subtle facts that need to be worked into the story.
Right.
So what people don't understand or appreciate, and the media around here is certainly not going to tell them, is that Idaho has been a pro-life state since it was a territory. So we became a territory in 1864, right? And there was a territorial legislature that gathered and to set out. And back in those days, it was like a little magazine of the laws of the territory of Idaho, right? As opposed to the library of laws we now have, right? But it's very important for people to realize that in 1864 and 1865, when Idaho was just organizing as a legal, territory, that legislature decided to include abortion in the first territorial acts of the legislature. It made it a crime, a felony, to procure or provide an abortion except in the case where the mother's life was at risk. That was the law in Idaho until 1973. 109 years or something like that. And there was no exception for rape. There was no exception for incest. And in fact, the legislatures over the years at various points had recodified that law. And in 1907, which I know is ancient history, but in 1907, the president of the Idaho Medical Association wrote a letter to the legislature urging it to recodify that law on abortion because the medical profession recognized abortion as murder. And they did not want any practitioner of abortion to be considered to be part of their profession, because medicine was about affirming life. It was not about procuring and providing death. That was the law in Idaho and the culture in Idaho, and in fact in most every state in the United States of America from colonial times till 1970. Well, about 1970, 69, I think, was a state. There was the first state that began to break with that norm. But for all of American history, people have understood life begins at conception, and it's a human life, and it has value. So we're living in a time where this notion that babies aren't really babies or not really human or not really something is kind of a new phenomenon, right? Culturally embedded in the very fabric of this country and in Western civilization, actually going back to 300 AD, is the notion that this is a life, this is a human life that's worth protecting and is valued in the law. 1973 comes along and the legislature is in session when the Supreme Court hands down Roe. And it says, we just found this really cool part of the Constitution that has been hidden in the secret decoder chamber for all these years. And voila, women have a right to have an abortion. The legislature was aghast, of course, as were most people. They met with the Attorney General. They sat around and had meetings and committee hearings and said, "What, we don't want to do this. What can we do? What, blah, blah, blah," right? The law is the law, right? The Supreme Court has spoken on this issue, so Idaho's law must be amended. The legislature sat down and said, okay, we will legalize abortion in Idaho Code and conform with Roe v. Wade. However, this can't possibly stand. This Roe decision is so crazy, it's not going to stand. So they included the first trigger law in that session. When Roe is overturned, we're going to revert to the law that we've always had since we were a territory. And at the time, people expected it to be a year or two. The right case, a change in the court, something, a constitutional amendment, a convention of the states, whatever. Nobody really knew how it was going to work, but largely most state legislators realized that this was an unjust declaration. It was an abuse of constitutional power by the Supreme Court, and it wasn't going to last. So they embedded the trigger law into that very first act in 1973. Fast forward to the 1990 story I just told you about, right? So here comes the House Bill 625, which is designed to test Roe. Unfortunately, those legislators in 1973 were wrong. It's a lot more difficult to deal with Roe than anybody thought at the time, because here they were in 1986 and the 1990s still dealing with Roe. In that fight with Cecil Andrus, the Republican legislature passed House Bill 625. Cecil Andrus, the Democrat governor, ran for office multiple times, declaring himself to be a godly man, a pro-life Democrat, a conservative, socially conservative Democrat. So they had the pro-life movement had some reason to think that he might actually sign that bill. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons that the National Right to Life Committee had picked Idaho for this test case, because they had a Republican legislature and what they thought might be a pro-life governor, Democrat governor. So it had some tinge of bipartisanship to it, right? Well, in the middle of all that legislative fighting, the bill gets to Cecil's desk, and he says to the Republican legislature leadership, I'm really thinking about, I think I might just sign that bill, but I'm concerned if we're successful at overturning Roe, we got this trigger law on the books here, and I'm concerned that may be too much. So I would feel a lot better about life in general if you could somehow manage to repeal that trigger law and do it kind of quickly so that I can then look at this House Bill 625 issue without worrying about this trigger law. And for some reason, honestly, they believed him. So they repealed the trigger law in a record like 2 days. And they went to him and they said, okay, well, we got that. And he signed that immediately. And then he spent a couple more days thinking about House Bill 625. And I was in his office the day he had a big news conference in the governor's office, the day he announced that he was vetoing House Bill 625. So the pro-life, that's part of the devastation of the moment for the pro-life movement, because not only did they not get House Bill 625 moving, they lost the trigger law. And frankly, I was involved in that decision-making with the governor's office, and it was clearly manipulative and pretty cynical. So, having been a part of that, it was always on my list of things to do at the legislature is to restore that trigger law, because I always believed that Roe was going to get overturned. I didn't know that I would be alive to see it, but I believed that it was such an unjust decision, and so far unsupportable by the plain text of the Constitution, that sooner or later America would recover its wits and moral compass, and that law was going, that ruling, that edict of the court was going to be overturned. But while restoring the trigger law was important, it was always pretty far down on the to-do list, because we were always and have always been about trying to save as many babies as we can, as quickly as we can, because there is an immediacy to this. Those lives are at risk today. So every session, our calculus was, what can we do at the legislature? What can we get passed at the legislature this session that will save the most babies the quickest. And so in that context, the trigger law, restoring the trigger law, was always a nice thing to do, but it was not immediate, right? Because we didn't seem to be in any danger of Roe getting overturned, right? Year after year, decade after decade, the fight was for things like informed consent, waiting periods, getting parental consent enforced, trying to figure out how to get the government out of the business of subsidizing Planned Parenthood. So the trigger law was always pushed to the back burner. And for reasons that I think are actually quite cool and quite mysterious, and were mysterious to me even at the time, I decided that in 2020 that we were going to deal with this as one of several things that I thought it was time for us to just get that out of the way and get it done, to restore the trigger law. And it did not really take that much time for me to do that, because it was a fairly easy bill to lobby, because we had by that time a very strong pro-life legislature, and it was, I think, largely viewed at the time as a statement of principle that would never actually do anything. So it was kind of easy to vote for it without any real consequence, without having to worry about any pushback from Democrats or anybody else, because it was just a thing that was just sitting there, right? Unenforceable, but nice. Well, as we all know, lightning struck. 2 years later, the Supreme Court actually overturns Roe. And despite the best efforts of a lot of people, the law took effect. The law is still in effect. The law is saving lives and changing the future of Idaho.
So when you said I was mostly right but missed a couple key facts, I missed a large swath of facts.
Well, there's a lot of history to this.
You don't just be cool with saying, Matt, you're an idiot. Let me put you straight. I'm good with it. I say it all the time. Okay, so that's 2020. Trigger law comes into effect. Now, again, you're going to have to help me on this, but the trigger law, which I have not read in full or anything, but it's my understanding that the trigger law essentially said, look, in the absence, not even the absence, there are no exemptions. Life of the mother, rape, incest, there are affirmative defenses in the original trigger law. So you weren't exempted as a physician. It was not, you could be charged, but you had a solid defense if you were charged with something like this. And that's what the 2023 legislative session started grappling with, which is where you got asked to work with the IMA, Idaho Medical Association, and other people and say, okay, there are people that want to revise this. Why don't you guys come together and work this out? So again, am I correct in that the trigger law had no proper exemptions as exist today for life of the mother, rape, and incest? It was affirmative defenses which could function in a similar manner, but they weren't proper exemptions as we know them.
Well, the legalities of the affirmative defense versus exceptions, I think, are too complicated for
Let's
us to go into that. I still believe that the original concept in the trigger law using affirmative defense was actually better for physicians than the current system. The changes we made, but I got tired of arguing with them about it. So I was like, fine, okay, if you want exceptions, then we'll go with that, okay? Right. Because and I've had many conversations with lobbyists for the IMA. I've met with the boards of the IMA. Sure. I've met with many people involved in medicine, and I find it to be a very frustrating situation, really.
Why is that?
Well, because I think we're getting, this is a very complicated, the response of the medical community to the law and the dynamic we're dealing with is very complicated. There is not a simple, they're just a bunch of, hooligans who want to kill babies. It's not like that. The fact is, it's very complicated. And there are many, many considerations as to explaining why the medical community, at least as represented by St. Luke's and the Idaho Medical Association, have taken the position that they have, right?
Can I just say, I really appreciate that you have articulated that. I've spoken to many people of varying positions, and I have not spoken with anyone who's like, oh, I just want to kill a bunch of kids, right? And again, I'm a dummy, so I don't understand all the reasons, but these are not people that are malicious intent. And to hear you, who has worked with them and obviously are on the pro-life position, say that, I want to acknowledge that. Like, I really appreciate that you're saying that. Because
this issue has consumed my life, honestly. My entire adulthood has been wrapped around this issue of abortion from both sides. I've spent a considerable amount of time thinking about, when I was a pro-choice advocate and political operative for the Democratic Party, I had a lot of great friends, right? We used to sit around in Pengilly's saloon talking about politics and pro-life people and conservatives and Christians and Mormons and blah, 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 right? And I think back to those conversations when the issue of abortion would come up, right? And I will tell you that we all believed that we were good people. We all believed that we were doing good. We didn't sit around and, have seances about, how to destroy babies, right? That's not how we thought about the issue. Because we were thinking that we were advocating for women, that it was a matter of her rights and her choice. So we felt actually quite righteous about advocating for abortion rights as part of a mindset which said that this was essential to her being fulfilled as a woman.
If I may, I was introduced to the idea that birth control and abortion actually had been not great for women by, actually, of all people, Jordan Peterson. He had articulated at one point, I don't think he said abortion, but he definitely said that birth control had been difficult for women. And again, as a younger guy, I was like, what? Like, how do you mean? But in hearing the explanation and the reasoning behind it, which is, look, we're 100 years ago and you're a young man and you have a young woman you're dating or whatever it might be, and she gets pregnant, you have responsibility here. There's an aspect of, hey, society is expecting you guys to act accordingly now, and this is it. And with the advent of birth control and, of course, abortion, there was a lessening of responsibility on the part of the man, because it's, hey, are you on the pill? It's your responsibility. You're the one that's responsible for you getting pregnant. I'm just a dude.
Right.
I'm just here for a good time. I'm not here for a long time. And in examining this issue as well from this lens, which is, you come to the point as a young couple that, finds themselves pregnant in the abortion is legal world. It is now if they go ahead and have the child, oh, it's the woman's decision. The man is getting pulled into this. If, say I was a younger person that didn't want it, I'd be like, oh, well, this is a problem and perhaps I don't want this kid. And it's, your responsibility. Like, you need to take care of this, all these things. There's no responsibility on my part. I'm trying to avoid the responsibility of my engagement with this young woman, right? Were that the situation? And seeing that now, it's like, wow, that is a perspective or view that I had not considered or conceptualized as, like you're saying, like we're, as a younger person growing up in Northern California, I was always told that abortion is about empowering women. And looked through a certain lens, I can see that people think that 100%. Yep. But I think it's also worth mentioning that it's like, it also skirts any responsibility of men and puts it all squarely on the responsibility of women. And that's a rough position to be in. No,
the truth is, thinking back to those conversations with Budweiser down there at Pengilly's Saloon, right? We said we support a woman's right to choose, but we never finished the sentence. Choose what? We support a woman's right to choose what? And that is still the Achilles heel of the pro-choice movement. You will never hear them finish the sentence because we have erased the baby. And to your point, I will shock you perhaps, or your audience more, by telling you that not only is abortion not a woman's issue, I think it's a man's issue. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this because, of course, when I first came into the pro-life movement, the Planned Parenthood and company tried to get me out of the room because I was a man. So I was disqualified from the debate because I was a man. This was a woman's issue. And I will tell you, that's one of the great deceptions of our age. Because what happens then is they try to tell people and sell people on the notion that this is empowering to women, when in fact what it's really doing is letting men off the hook and leaving women to clean up the mess on aisle 6. I know for a fact, I don't care what crap you read in the Idaho Statesman, okay, or watch on Channel 7. I have lived this. I've lived virtually every aspect of this. Every outcome of an abortion, pregnancy decision, I have lived it. And I will tell you that there are certain facts which are very uncomfortable, which nevertheless remain true, just like gravity. It is the problem with abortion largely has to do with the irresponsibility of men. The problem with the modern feminist movement and saying this is about a woman's body is that it actually empowers men to be irresponsible and leaves women holding the bag. It cheapens relationships. It cheapens sexuality. It cheapens both men and women. The era that we're living in of easy love and easy drugs. I mean, that's where I came of age in that era, okay? I'm the tail end of the boomers, okay? I was in junior high school when Roe came down. High school was the beginning of the era of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, okay? That's how Roe came to be, right? Roe was a response to sex, drugs, and rock and roll because the problem with sex, drugs, rock and roll is that stuff happens. Easy sex has to do with easy procreation, which nobody signed up for, right? But God had a plan for us, whether we like it or not. There are certain biological realities which exist. And you can rant against and kick the goads, but the fact is you can't repeal gravity and you can't repeal reproduction, okay? There are consequences to irresponsible sexual behavior. And I'm not here condemning anybody because I've engaged in a boatload of it, okay? I bought into that lifestyle. That's why I happen to know so much about this. The truth is, it's a gross injustice to women. A gross injustice to women. The women that have to carry the burden of motherhood, they have to carry the burden of making the decision about whether to go through with that pregnancy. They carry the burden of whether or not they're prepared to become a single mother, right? They have to carry the burden of making the decision to destroy that life. And to carry, you cannot repeal that fact either. We can pretend, we can bury the guilt, we can turn our back on it, we can pretend that it was just tissue, it's not really a baby yet, or whatever. I mean, the human mind is capable of the grossest, almost limitless ability to rationalize evil, okay? We can rationalize just about anything. So I don't care what a woman says about how she feels about her abortion, because I know the reality is she destroyed an innocent human life. And sometimes men are at least man enough to be part of that decision and own that responsibility and to carry that burden with them for the rest of their lives. Oftentimes they don't even know that that decision has been made. It is grossly unfair to women to carry that burden. And it's one of the great lies of the feminist movement. And I think that we're never going to fix this abortion problem until men become men again and take responsibility. So, to your point, in the era before Roe, you fooled around, you got a girl pregnant, you were expected to step up and deal with it. And I think those days have to be recovered. We have to learn how to be, when we have to teach our children how to be responsible with our sexuality. I believe our sexuality is the most potent, powerful force in the universe. It's more powerful than an atom bomb because it makes people, right? The whole human race exists because of our sexuality. And God gave us great instructions as to how to use that in a way that is healthy and nurturing and positive, right? We decide we're going to use it for our own selfish ends and in a way that's irresponsible. What could go wrong?
Man, you hit some, you have a way with your words. I appreciate you. What I very much like in talking to, I've spoken with the CEO of Idaho Medical Association, Susie Keller, as well as Dr. Macon Casper, who's an OBGYN out of Nampa. And both of these individuals were advocating for a revision of the law as it exists today, but not, to be clear, not advocating for elective, just, I don't want to have this kid anymore, pregnancy terminations. They were not asking for that. At least that's all I know is what I've talked to them about.
Right.
And with the revision of the law that you guys worked on in the 2023 session, there was, again, which they advocated for. They were saying, hey, we want life of the mother, right? Exemptions. And it's clear that you feel that, hey, look, that's not the best position, but fine. If you guys want the exemptions, whatever. So you have exemptions for life of the mother.
Well, that again, okay. I just be clear.
Sure.
The issue of affirmative defense versus exceptions is a very fine legal argument.
We're not attorneys. We're not trying to give legal advice. Like, let me be clear. I'm just trying to talk to you as a person about, what I have rattling around my dumb head. So this is the way I understood it, which is essentially you found a compromise that provided exemptions for life of the mother, rape and incest with a police report, and a type of exemption that was that people consider health of the mother. Now, this one, in reading the bill, it was this underlined portion that was you had an exemption for a situation in a pregnancy that, although not life-threatening immediately, that if left untreated or unaddressed, could develop into a life-threatening situation. And beyond that, and again, this law is not prosecuting mothers. This law is making it expressly illegal for physicians to engage in this. They had minimum sentencings and things of that nature. But that is my understanding that was the bulk of the bill. Am I correct on
well
those?
what the bill? Well, there were amendments made to the Defense of Life Act in the 2023 session.
Yes.
I spent all that session wrestling around with the IMA on trying to find language that would make them more comfortable. I am interested in making the medical community more comfortable with the law, because the law cannot work until we get to the point where we have a medical community that embraces it, or at least tolerates it. Okay.
Which again is very, very important, right? Like we could have a position that we feel is appropriate, but if the medical community is not engaging or refuses to participate, then we're all at a loss anyway.
Well, potentially. And it could be that we simply have to wait for a better medical community. Okay.
Which is a huge problem, because we don't have, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but like we don't have OBGYN residencies here. I'm very hopefully meeting with the CEO of a rural hospital soon, I believe next week, to talk about the problems with getting enough employment to have a labor and delivery unit. And it's like, I was so happy to have this initial conversation with him today, because he said, look, Matt, the issue with my hospital losing labor and delivery is not really a legislative issue. Yeah, maybe, this was affected a little bit, but the issue we're having is just staffing. We don't have the appropriate staff, especially when dealing with a rural hospital. If you have somebody who wants to be a labor and delivery nurse or engage in that, yeah, in a large hospital, maybe she'll have enough work to do that work all day long, and she can just, bring babies into the world and enjoy it. But in a rural hospital, she's going to have to take a lot of other shifts on her way to, labor and delivery as well. He's like, so ultimately we're experiencing a large staffing issue. And again, this was just an initial conversation, but it's so complex, right? Like,
it is complex. And so it might interest you. I have advocated and continue to advocate. I am lobbying and have been for 3 years to increase our residency, to get the legislature to finance more residency programs in the state of Idaho. I'm hoping that we will get appropriations for 2 OBGYN residencies approved by this next legislature.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
It is.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
And part of what I think you need, this is so hard to get, the complexities of the medical community's response to DOLA is so complicated and has so many things to it, right?
Sure.
We could be here for hours, and we should probably do this again sometime.
Hey, you are always welcome back. And I know I've asked a lot of you to come today, but if you want to come back, I'd love it. So let's
talk about the question has arisen. Does the pro-life community want to put doctors in jail? Okay. As we were crafting that legislation, I can tell you this offensive to some doctors, but the truth is they were not even on the radar in terms of being a consideration. That legislation was not crafted for doctors. That legislation was crafted for us. Why are there criminal penalties attached to violating the Defense of Life Act? It's not because the legislature or Idaho Chooses Life wants to put doctors in prison. It's because we want to affirm the value of human life. So when you got to and that was a very long and difficult and complex conversation in drafting the original trigger law and the Defense of Life Act as amended, right? What is the appropriate penalty for violating this law. Should it be a parking ticket? Should it be a fine of $100? Well, maybe some people would say, yes, that'd be great. I think the IMA might even say, that'd be great. The problem with that is that we're not interested in throwing doctors in prison. What we are interested in doing is affirming the value of human life and trying to correct the gross perversion that we have suffered as a culture for 50 years. The propaganda that says it's nothing, it's not a thing, it's a cell or a collection of cells. Nothing has even happened of any consequence. When you get an abortion, it's a nothing burger, right? You can just go on your way like you just filled a cavity. And we're saying, wait a minute, that's bullpucky. Every one of us began life just like that. There's no question. The science and the morality is that's a human being. So the penalty section has to do with affirming the value. If I shoot you cold dead right now, because you just made me mad and I feel offended, okay? There are penalties attached to that because society recognizes that you are a human being with value. And it ain't going to be $100 fine for accidental discharge of my fire, arm, right? What do we do? How do we affirm the value of that life and try to teach people that, no, this is not a collection of cells. This is a human being. It's not about throwing doctors in jail. It's about the rest of us, okay? Doctors weren't even on the radar screen when that bill was crafted, okay? Let's talk about the politics, the complexity of the medical profession. When you're talking to the medical profession, you have to appreciate the fact that there has been a propaganda effort in the medical profession. I mentioned earlier, in 1907, the president of the IMA demanded that the legislature make it clear that abortion was criminal conduct, was not medicine. And no practitioner of abortion was to be accepted as a doctor, as part of the profession of healing, the healing arts, right? When Roe came down, that was the state of affairs in medicine. Every doctor thought that way. Every nurse thought that way. They went into medicine to heal. Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry realized that they had a problem with the medical community. In fact, you go back and you start looking through articles in the mid-70s and 80s, large doctors all over this country were hardcore pro-life people. They would be as crazy as me, okay? Because they knew how life began. They were in medicine to affirm life. The Planned Parenthood people had a problem. And they went to work, and they have spent decades going into medical schools, going into professional associations, and advocating for the concept that abortion is health care.
If I may, Dr. Casper came in and was very clear that she has never done an abortion as a practitioner. She never participated in abortion as a medical student. So it would appear that her values are very much against the prevailing culture of the medical school that she went to and then the medical profession. She still, though, had concerns about the way the laws are right now in Idaho, because she feels, and I don't want to quote her, you can watch the episode, but she was saying, hey, look, there are these areas, low probability, right? Thank God, the things she was talking about were not like every other pregnancy leads to something like this. But she was very concerned about some aspects of life of the mother that were, for instance, in the revision that was proposed by the IMA, that, hey, it's a situation that if left untreated could become life-threatening. right? Or would become life-threatening. Again, don't quote me on the language. That's what she was looking for. So like and I'm not sitting here defending Planned Parenthood at all. I'm not sitting here defending Dr. Casper's position either. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. And that I think the bulk of the conversation around this nationally has focused on elective abortions, elective pregnancy terminations. And I don't hear anyone from the IMA or from the medical community in Idaho, I'm not talking other states, in Idaho advocating for reinstating just elective, I'm like a 15-year-old that got pregnant, terminations.
Well, that's not, well, you may not have heard it, but
I have not yet.
But that's not true.
Sure. I'm sure there are some people out there that are asking for it. But what I'm wondering is, do you think that there is a place in functional Idaho law where you have some aspect of life of the mother exemptions alongside, or excuse me, health of the mother, that are not, hey, this is not life-threatening in the second where she's going to die, but this is also leading to a situation that could lead to like a stroke or something of that nature?
Okay, so I'm adamantly opposed to a health exception. Why?
Well, I mean, I think you've made your case pretty solid on why.
Well, I'd like to
please.
like to articulate a little bit more as to why that's such a red line for us. Okay. It has to do with the value of that human life. You cannot trade a human life for someone else's comfort or even discomfort or even health condition. A life for a life situation is the reason I have no trouble with the life of the mother exception in the law is because the state of Idaho has no business mandating to a mother or to a family that she must sacrifice her life for that of her baby. Okay. Now, as a parent, I would say that I hope and pray that I would have the courage to sacrifice myself for my son's life. But the state of Idaho can't make me do that.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Makes perfect sense.
Likewise, the state of Idaho cannot choose to sacrifice the life of one person to benefit another person. For example, and it's very difficult to come up with analogies because pregnancy is such a unique situation. But pretend, for example, that you're a perfect. My kidneys are failing, and I find out that you are a perfect donor.
Right.
Okay. And I try to persuade you, and you say, "Yeah, I don't like you that much, and I'm not going to do that." You know what I mean? So I shoot you and take your kidneys, right? Well, your life for my health. People would say, "Hey, that's terrible," right? You might get to keep the kidneys, but you're going to prison forever, right? And probably death row after you, right? Because we can't have that. I don't think we can have that with children in the womb either. Now, that said, here's what the IMA won't admit. This is what the statesman will never write to you. The life of the mother exception in Idaho law today is not, you got to wait for the woman to be dead. Then you can have an abortion. The concept, if I had a magic wand and I could rewrite that statute without dinking around with the process, I would have used the term life-threatening. That's the gold standard in my mind and that is what I think that those words mean. Right? Life of the mother means life-threatening.
Yes.
Okay? And the Idaho Supreme Court is already, contrary to what you will not hear from the IMA, the Idaho Supreme Court has already adjudicated this. We don't just have the language of the statute. We also have a 90-page opinion by the Idaho Supreme Court, which is equal in its weight and law. It's as much the law as the language of Idaho Code, right? They not only dealt with various arguments, they also applied the law and explained the law and defined the law. So in 23, that session, the bill that we passed, actually we didn't change the Defense of Life Act one whit. all we did was codify what the Supreme Court had already handed down 2 months before that law was passed. We codified the concepts and the definitions and the principles that the Supreme Court already articulated. So in a weird way, we didn't even do anything, right? Because it was already the law. For example, the law never was meant to apply to ectopic pregnancies, as an example. It was clearly written, and it was well written, contrary to the statesman. In 2020, we never intended to cover, and that law was interpreted by the Idaho Supreme Court correctly. It said this law does not apply to ectopic pregnancies for these various reasons. So we just took that and said, yeah, we're going to put it in code just to stop the monkey business and the bullpucky out there and the propaganda tools of trying to confuse people. Right. So we changed the definition to make it absolutely explicitly clear, because most people are not going to go read the Supreme Court decision. I'll give you another example. In the Supreme Court decision, the medical community actually raised the question of, well, how close we're scared to death of this law because we don't know how close to dying she has to be before we're free to act. And we don't want to go to prison and go to jail and lose our practice, and terrible things will happen. Well, the Supreme Court addressed that question. And in fact, we addressed that question when we drafted the original law. There is no language whatsoever in the code which says there is a time frame, or, as the Supreme Court put it, there is no immediacy to the condition. If in a physician's good faith judgment, that condition can be reasonably termed to be life-threatening, that physician is free to act. So in a weird way, we have a health exception. In practical terms, in real medicine terms, the life of the mother is a health exception, but it is a standard which has to be sufficiently grave to justify the termination and execution of an innocent life. That's the standard. And I will tell you, part of our struggle with the medical community is political and ideological. There are people that believe in a woman's right to choose, and they believe that's right and morally defensible. I appreciate that. I don't agree with it. I just wish they'd be honest about it. But we also have another dynamic at work in which every physician in Idaho and across the country that's now in practice came of age and was trained under Roe. Planned Parenthood was very successful at legitimizing abortion as a medical procedure. There are a lot of OBGYNs who were trained into using abortion as a method of treatment, when in fact, if you accept the premise that that is a human life in the womb, there is virtually no medical condition which requires abortion as a therapy. So when you talk about you have an infection, right? And I'm a doctor, and you come to me and you say, I have this infection. I give you an antibiotic, right? I give you a treatment. There is no medical condition in which the therapy is killing the baby. Abortion, losing a baby may be a consequence of treating the woman's condition. And in fact, one of the things that you should read the law sometime.
No, I did read the revision, the 4-page piece that you guys did in 23 before you got here.
Well, in subsection 4 of the original law, there is an explicit provision that immunity is granted to doctors to treat a woman's health, even if that treatment results in harm or even death of the baby. For example, a clearest example would be a mother has cancer. The doctor says
chemotherapy or something.
right.
Of that
The doctor says we can't wait. She says, "Well, I'm 6 months. Can't we just wait?" No, we really need to start treating you now. She agrees. The baby's harmed or even killed as a result. That doctor is granted immunity under subsection 4, and that's the original language of the trigger law, by the way. Okay? Even if that baby is harmed or is destroyed, if it is unintentional, if it is coincidental to taking care of her, that doctor is granted absolute immunity. So that too is part of the health of the mother protections in current law.
David, you are not going to believe me when I tell you this. I was not anticipating having this deep and rich of a conversation with you, so I only allotted about an hour 25 past. Listen, I know this is a haul for you to come out here. Please come back. This conversation is fantastic. I feel like after almost an hour and a half, we're just getting into like the meat of this conflict.
We are actually.
I can see why you did multiple parts on other podcasts with people. Please come back. I really don't want to cut this short, but I have family commitments I have to get to.
Yep, I have to go vote.
Okay. Awesome.
I'll never forgive myself.
Awesome. Go vote. Please come back. We don't have to do now. We can meet downtown. When I have the studio operational that's closer to you, I'll make it work. But I
dang near live at the legislature in the winter. So.
God bless you, sir. Then you know what? You will be the first interview in the new studio when I get it lined up. And again, it'll be right downtown. We'll pick up right where we left off here. I really appreciate the history here. It's phenomenal to understand where Idaho has been, how this current situation fits in. And again, as a dummy who just moved here, under 3 years ago, frankly, it's always a struggle to understand where I am in the history of my new state and my new community. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for making it in today. I promise you, I'll get you the best coffee ever if you come back, and we'll continue the conversation.
And I'd be happy to do that. The fact is, this is an extraordinarily complicated subject. Yeah. It has warped our entire culture. Okay. And it is a struggle that continues, will continue. And the fact of the matter is that it impacts everybody in this society, whether they know it or not. I did an interview with Kevin Miller yesterday morning, and I didn't get enough time, but I got started. I'm trying to get him to give me some time to talk about the relationship between illegal immigration and abortion. We have this, contrary to popular opinion, right? Abortion is this weird social issue over here and a lot of conservatives don't want to get into it. They want to talk about tax policy, the deficit, whatever. The truth of the matter is that abortion is at the core of just about every social question that you can name, because it is so core to who we are as a species, right? So economics is not about gold or oil. Economics is about people. No people, who gives a shit what's in the ground? Yeah, right. Okay? Right? We give it value, right? We make gold something to value. Yeah. It's our work and our consumption that is economics, right? Well, we have been killing our future, and we are now paying the price for it. Bill Clinton actually went so far as to admit that last week. They should not let that guy out there talking, because his filter's breaking, right?
Well, I don't know 100% where you're going with this, but I suspect I understand, and I really want to dive into this because, again, we're not going to have people to work unless we have people. Right, like we're not, and this leads to an overdependence on other people.
Look, we got to have illegal immigration because Our birth rate has declined to the point where we are not replacing our population.
Yeah.
Okay? I know I was stunned when I read it. Now, of course, nobody will connect the rest of the dots, but we've killed 70-some million babies. 70-some million babies. We have killed 95,000 babies in Idaho since Roe started. When you start looking at those, about half of those people, were they alive today, would be having children, we'd be into grandchildren, okay?
Let's pick this up again.
Right?
I really appreciate yours. Thanks for coming in.
You bet.